In late 2024, hoping to elicit a wave of investment, Michigan legislators approved tax incentives for data centers. And it worked. Right now, there are 16 proposed data centers in 10 counties across Michigan's Lower Peninsula. But less than 2 years later, legislators are considering measures like a one-year moratorium on data center developments. So, what happened? Kelly House covers environmental issues for Bridge, Michigan, and she's here to help us understand as part of an ongoing series of interviews with reporters who cover data centers around the Great Lakes. I'm Rob Green. Welcome to Freshwater People. Kelly, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the big picture. Some of the biggest companies in the world, Google, Microsoft, Meta, and more, have been in a race to dominate the AI-driven economy that they see as the future. They're spending trillions of dollars building infrastructure, and to get in on that, what did Michigan do in 2024?
So Michigan authorized full tax exemptions for state sales and use taxes for these facilities if they meet some minimum requirements around jobs and investment. So when you're talking about a facility that could cost billions of dollars and then have, billions of dollars in equipment turnover every few years, we're talking about a benefit that could be tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars per facility. So that, obviously attractive to industry. It was meant to bring these industries here, and it has done so.
Aside from the tax breaks, are there other reasons a company like Google might want to build a data center in Michigan?
Yeah, I think the tax breaks are the number one thing. And in fact, talking with industry representatives as these bills were being considered, they sort of issued an ultimatum and said, we do not come to states that do not give us state tax breaks. So that is number one to even get your foot in the door. But yes, and then in terms of Michigan's profile, relatively affordable farmland. And these are facilities that take up a lot of land. So, owners are looking for lower prices. A favorable climate. These facilities throw off a lot of heat. And require cool air to cool or water to cool their servers. So, we have a relatively cool climate. It means you need to spend less energy cooling these things. Abundance of water, depending on how they're built. Data centers can use a lot of water. Not all of them do. It does depend on construction practices. Those are some of the main ones in our state.
So they need cheap land, affordable water, and affordable electricity, as well as a business-friendly environment. Describe the data centers we're talking about. Why do they need cheap land and water and electricity?
They need available electricity on the grid. A single one of these things can have the power demand of like a large American city. And so the developers of these facilities are looking to places that have that available energy on the grid. And once you've sort of, Michigan maybe has, let's simplify it, one power plant, 8/10 of its capacity is used. Well, someone can take that extra 2/10 of capacity before you have to build another power plant. So it's a race to access that existing capacity because you can plug in faster. And there are only so many places where that capacity exists. So Michigan has that for now.
Is the Great Lakes region seeing more data center development than other parts of the country, or is Michigan?
Michigan is, it's in its infancy in our state. So far, we have one project that is actively in construction and has all of the approvals needed to, be built. But we certainly are seeing a wave of interest in this state. And that's true of the Great Lakes region as a whole. Ohio was very early in on this industry. They passed tax breaks, I want to say more than a decade ago. So they have been a hub for data centers for years, and that is continuing to be true. Michigan, like I said, we have one facility that's gained approval, but at this point, 16 more that are waiting in the wings with formal proposals, and probably more that are sort of sniffing around the state that the public has yet to learn about. So, yes, we are getting a lot of attention. How much of that materializes into actual facilities is an open question. And most experts that I speak to do not expect all of the proposals that are out there today to materialize.
Okay, back to 2024. Legislators know that to get in on this investment, they need to pass some kind of incentive. And so they vote for this tax exemption. And how did that vote break down? Was it along party lines?
It was bipartisan, but the vote itself was on very narrow margins. So, you had big proponents in both parties and big skeptics in both parties. Um, Proponents were saying, hey, if we don't build these, they'll get built somewhere else. Michigan needs this investment. Data centers, even if you give them tax exemptions at the state level, they have the potential to bring in huge amounts of taxes locally for schools and public services. Their argument was that that's worth it. And while these things don't create many jobs directly, they argued, the constant maintenance and building of these facilities could create a lot of construction jobs and sort of jobs, spin out jobs in the communities that are going to constantly have contractors coming in. So that was the argument for. The arguments against were, these are some of the most wealthy corporations in the world. Do they really need taxpayer giveaways? That was sort of the basic objection. And then you had folks who were concerned more about the industry itself. You know, is AI a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, that's a huge conversation nationally and globally. And then these facilities do use a lot of energy and potentially a lot of water. They could potentially pollute. How are we going to make sure that they don't come ravage our state?
Well, if the goal was to get these companies interested in building data centers in Michigan, I guess they were pretty successful. But once the plans became known to the public, there was a backlash. Who's opposing the developments, and are their concerns? What are their concerns? Are they the same as when the bill was being considered?
Some are the same. I think you saw the conversation majorly pick up steam when the concept became reality. We saw interest groups, environmental groups, trade groups, others weighing in on the bills themselves. But the public really took notice when we had proposals on the table. And, it was everything from neighbors who said, I don't want a huge development next door, sort of the classic, just not in my backyard, to, in the case of one data center in our state that would be used for like nuclear weapons research, anti-war people saying we don't want our backyard to, be a part of this industry. Environmental groups that are concerned about ensuring that these facilities don't overtax water and energy resources. Ratepayer advocates and utility watchdogs who fear that, again, if not regulated correctly, the vast build out of transmission lines and potentially power plants, big storage batteries to serve these facilities could be a cost that ratepayers bear and that drives up rates. One thing we've started to see on the campaign trail for governor is some candidates on the right linking data centers to clean energy, which is another hot button issue for some of their key constituents, and saying, the more data centers we build, the more renewable energy projects that are going to be necessary in Michigan, because our state has a requirement for utilities to get off of fossil fuel energy. And so they're trying to make the case that, if we let these data centers come, solar farms are going to be next.
That seems that sort of points to another interesting aspect of this, because these are very large developments, and yet they're often proposed for fairly small communities. And that echoes the proposals for solar farms or wind farms that those communities have often opposed. So it seems as though there's a mismatch between the size and power of the companies that are pushing these developments and the small size of the communities that are now having to deal with these proposals and the resistance to them.
Absolutely. And, many of these small towns, or in a lot of cases, unincorporated, townships, um, it's, township board made up of volunteer farmers, maybe a couple of municipal staffers, but that's it. And oftentimes they don't even have um, zoning, they've never considered industrial zoning in their community to mean anything other than maybe another auto garage or a small, shop of some kind or factory. They never envisioned that it would mean, you know, multi-hundred acre sites with buildings that are the size of multiple football fields. And so, yeah, you have these communities that were just really caught off guard and felt like they were being forced to make a decision um, on a land use that they never really contemplated before. And so I think that's where you're starting to see a lot of communities say, pump the brakes. We're putting a moratorium in place so that we can figure out what recourse do we have to regulate these things. If we're going to have them, where is an appropriate place in our community for them to exist? Do we need to create different zoning that treats this industry differently from just, industry as a whole? Um, and, how are we going to regulate sound, noise pollution, light pollution, all of these other things?
Have you been surprised by the intensity of the opposition?
I wouldn't say I was surprised because I've been watching this play out in other states where the industry started to make inroads earlier. So anticipated that this might come once data centers come. So I don't know that it's been a surprise, but it certainly has been this huge upswelling. This was not something that I think most people in Michigan were actively contemplating in our state even a couple of years ago. And now we've got dozens of communities at this point in our state that are either faced with a proposal and trying to decide whether to accept it and what the ramifications are, or actively trying to preempt future proposals by, putting a pause on any development. So it certainly has been intense.
In 2025, the Michigan Public Service Commission adopted standards that aimed to address some of the concerns about data centers. What is the Public Service Commission, and what do these rules they adopted mean for developers who want to build data centers?
Yeah. So the Public Service Commission is a body made up of 3 appointees of the governor that essentially regulates utilities in our state. In exchange for having a monopoly, utilities get regulated differently than other businesses. So the Public Service Commission makes sure that, they decide when utilities can raise rates. They decide whether utilities have invested adequately in maintaining the grid or ensuring that there are enough power sources to serve everyone in the state. So that's typically their job. Now they've got this whole other job of like deciding how to serve new customers that are unprecedented in our state. I mean, energy use in the state of Michigan, and this is true in much of our country, has been pretty stable for decades. And so it's been, unprecedented in recent decades to have a massive new user coming online like this. And it raises huge questions about um, are we going to build power plants? If so, where do we build them? Who pays? So, what's been happening at the Public Service Commission lately is trying to put in place uniform standards that avoid some of the potential negative consequences of this new load and embrace some of the potential positives. Um, So historically, for instance, in the energy space, if you bring on big new customers, that can help lower rates or at least ease future rate increases because you have economies of scale, more people paying into the system, so each of us pays a little less. Um, Again, data centers are different though because it's a huge amount of load coming on all at once. And so it's not just, let me take a little bit from the resource that's already there. It's we need to build power lines, we need to build all this stuff. And there is a fear that this industry could be a bubble. And so what if we sign all these contracts, guarantee that we're going to build all this infrastructure with you have to build before the facility gets there so the facility can flip the switch and turn on, and then the facility never materializes or it uses way less power than anticipated. Those would all be really bad things for a number of reasons. So what the Michigan Public Service Commission has done so far with Consumers Energy, one of our state's major utilities, is they've said, okay, we're going to put a system in place where when you bring large customers this large online, they have to sign long-term contracts. I believe it's 15 years, maybe even a minimum of 20. Um, and there's a minimum demand. If you use less than 80% of what you said you were going to use, too bad, you're still paying us for at least 80%. If you end your contract early, you're still paying us for the future years. So that's all designed, again, to avoid negative ramifications. Not everyone believes it goes far enough. It's a huge point of debate. And then in DTE Energy's territory, that's where we actually have an active data center proposal. And DTE did not go through that process. DTE signed a one-off contract with the developer and then asked the Michigan Public Service Commission to approve it, and asked them to do it in an expedited way that did not leave room for public dissent and public hearings. And so that has been a huge source of contention. Our attorney general has attempted to reverse that decision unsuccessfully. A lot of critics of the data center industry say that, they don't feel they can trust that contract because of the way it was unveiled and then approved without a ton of input.
I guess, given the concerns, it's not that surprising that just a year or so after passing the tax incentives, there's now an effort to repeal them. How's that going?
Um, Bills are out there. They have yet to receive hearings. And it seems like it would be a tall order, because our governor signed and supports those tax breaks and has outright said she would veto any effort to repeal them.
Michigan has a climate law that requires 100% clean energy by the year 2040. Is a spike in demand from data centers that have been proposed, is that possible spike putting our climate goals at risk?
It's too early to tell whether it will threaten the climate goals. It's a major concern of a lot of people. The utilities, unsurprisingly, say that they have the ability to both meet this data center demand and meet the goals of that climate law, 100% clean energy by 2040. The proof is going to be in the pudding. And right now we have one data center that's a reality. If we were to get 5 or 10 or 15, there would be much harder conversations about how you serve that load. And because right now the facility that's planning to come online is tapping into existing grid resources plus batteries. They're not trying to build new power plants. But both utilities in the state have told their investors, hey, we have this big pipeline of potential investment, and we aim to build more natural gas plants to serve it. Now, how natural gas plants align with getting off fossil fuels by 2040. That'll be interesting to see. The law does allow natural gas that has carbon capture to basically sequester all of the negative impacts underground. That's in and of itself a nascent technology that we don't really know, how it's going to work. The utilities themselves haven't offered many details beyond that. They've both basically said, we're going to be filing what's called an integrated resources plan. It's basically their long range vision for how they're going to serve customers over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They're going to be filing that this year. And they've essentially said, wait till then, we'll outline it there. So I'm definitely watching that process with a lot of interest.
It sounds like officials at the top of both political parties see investment in data centers as a good thing. They want presumably tax revenue, a certain amount of employment, and the people on the ground who are opposing the data centers seem to feel broadly that it's not worth it, that the downsides outweigh the upsides. Do we know anything about the real effects on communities from these data centers?
Yeah, we do. And it has varied pretty widely from place to place, in part because regulations matter a lot. So, in some places, data centers have competed against, other energy users for power from the grid, driving up costs for everyone. In other places, costs have gone down for everyone because of the way that the system was structured, so that they're paying more of their fair share. In Loudoun County, Virginia, where there are a ton of data centers, residential property tax rates have actually been reduced because the local government says we don't need as much money from residents anymore because the data center is paying for all of our city services. So those are some of the benefits. But you also have communities like one around Memphis, Tennessee, where a data center was allowed to set up really hastily and basically build their own on-site gas generators that are noisy and polluting and a huge public health issue for the residents nearby. So, again, varies from place to place. I think here in Michigan, where we don't have lived experience yet, we just have a lot of expectations. People, of course, are fearing that they're going to get, premier of those two outcomes. And then I've also heard arguments from residents who have just said, you know, maybe it will bring new property taxes, but I like my small community. I don't necessarily want it to grow. Others who have said they worry that all that extra property tax revenue will just go toward providing services that are only necessary because of the data center. We didn't need paved roads until we had this facility here. We didn't need more police and fire until we had a major potential hazard in our community that requires a lot more, planning and vigilance. And so those folks are essentially saying, no, maybe it does bring benefits, but we don't think it's personally worth it, even if, yes, there is revenue.
Well, Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You can read Kelly's reporting at bridgemi.com, and we'll put some links in the description and show notes. For more stories from around the Great Lakes, visit greatlakesnow.org or search for Great Lakes Now on YouTube.